Everybody has a story, and every story needs to be heard. On this podcast, we are talking with each member of the General Conference Leadership Council. I'm your host, Alyssa Truman, and this is ANN Profiles. Today, I'm here with Dennis Carlson. He is the Director of Planned Giving and Trust Services here at the General Conference. Dennis, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here with me today. And I cannot wait to learn a little bit more about you. You walk by my office almost every single morning, and you have one of the most contagious smiles. You're always smiling. Did you know that you smile all the time?
I didn't know that, but
okay, well, you do.
I'm glad that I do, and I praise God for that.
Okay, well, all right, so we're going to actually start off with something, because when you came in here, you didn't fully know like everything that we're about ready to kind of explore, but you came in here and you told me like you weren't sure how far back we're going to go. So why don't you actually pull out of your pocket what you were telling me about? So you came here prepared to talk to me, and you were like, I got my DNA history here. So tell us, who is Dennis Carlson in his DNA?
Okay, well, my mother is also the historian of our family, and she's searched back and found to the 1500s of our family in Europe. And what my DNA is 52% Scandinavian. Right?
Well, good news. I feel like we must be brother and sister in some way, because I am also mostly Scandinavian.
So my grandfather and grandmother came from Sweden.
Me too.
And,
we might be really relatives.
But my grandmother, actually, the Scandinavian is Danish and Swedish and Norwegian and maybe a little bit of Finnish. Mm-hmm. And so my grandmother was from southern Sweden. My grandfather was from northern Sweden, or central Sweden, the farming area of Sweden, where Finns from Finland came and were having farms. So that's where the Finnish gets in there. And there's some Norwegian mixed in there somewhere. And but my grandmother was from southern Sweden, which used to be a part of Denmark. And so I have some Danish there as well. So it's Scandinavian is kind of the easy way to say 52%. Yeah. Okay. And then the UK or England and Northwestern Europe, it's very specific, Northwestern Europe, 47%. So that's on my mom's side.
Where would Northwest Europe be?
Germany, as my guess, because I had a great-grandmother who was 100%, well, as much as you can be 100% of anything, German.
Okay.
And the surprise, though, in all this is 1% Congo.
Congo? Okay.
Congo. Now, can you believe that? I think what that is my connection to Noah.
Okay. You're like, it goes back a ways.
Yeah. That's got to be, that 1% is got to be Noah there somewhere.
I love it. So you said your mom is a historian. So let's talk a little bit about those early childhood years, Dennis. Okay. So where were you born?
I was born in Riverside, California.
Okay. That's a little bit of an Adventist Mecca out in that area.
Yeah, it's a ghetto. And grew up there till I was about 14 years old, went to church every week, went to Sabbath school, went to VBS, went to evangelistic meetings till I was about 14. Kid. Yeah.
Okay.
And, fourth generation Adventist, but that really doesn't make a difference because God does not have grandchildren. And somewhere along the way, you've got to make it your own.
So that's so accurate. I'm also fourth generation Adventist. So do you know, did any of your other family members serve the church in the past? Were they just always, they were all just these generations of Adventists? What is your legacy, I guess, your Adventist church legacy?
The spiritual legacy. And, and now I appreciate that. Probably didn't appreciate it as much as when I was younger, but I appreciate that legacy now. And it was my grandparents that, my grandfather and then great-grandparents that became Seventh-day Adventists. And then that just passed down to me through the generations. And but I haven't always had the closest relationship with Jesus Christ, even though I was, quotes, brought up in the church or a Christian family.
So tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
Well, my parents are business people. I'm not a pastor, and so my training is in business. And I must have gotten that from my parents. They ran an insurance agency in La Sierra, which is a suburb of Riverside, California, for 20 years while I was growing up. And I must have admired what they did, because that's where I ended up heading my life eventually, is into the area of business.
Now, were they very active in their church? I mean, there's different, you just said it has to be your own. Our faith in Jesus is not, we can say we're culturally Adventist, does not actually mean that I am an Adventist. So did you grow up in a home where they were like very on fire, so that it kind of became a little bit more natural for you, or?
Well, my grandfather helped build the La Sierra University Church.
Okay.
So, I mean, they were very involved. My grandmother was always active in the Sabbath schools there, the children's Sabbath schools. My parents were very active in the church, supporting evangelistic meetings. That's how I got to go to those meetings, because I was going with my parents. Didn't appreciate it maybe as much then, but it did play a part later on. And my mom was active in the school, the Home and School Association, in those areas. So I would say they were pretty involved and invested in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the area where we lived.
Now, we're just gonna call it like those elementary, those younger ages, were you in like Pathfinder type clubs and stuff like that?
I was in Pathfinders, for about a year.
Okay.
Just so I could go to the camporee.
Oh.
I mean, our family did a lot of our own pathfindering and camping, and we were out a lot. And so that was just that 1 year, and I don't know, I probably was 11, 12, something like that.
Okay.
I was in the drum and bugle corps, I couldn't play the bugle very well. I couldn't play the drum, didn't have rhythm, so I was a flag bearer.
You're like, but I am a part of the club.
That's
I'm part of the group. All right. So Pathfinders, you didn't really necessarily do that much, but did you go to one of the Adventist schools?
Sure did.
Okay.
I went to La Sierra, and at that time it was called La Sierra Demonstration School. That's another word for elementary. But the reason they call it Demonstration School is because La Sierra University is right there. And all the people that are going through the education program have to do student teaching.
Okay.
And so I grew up with student teachers.
This is where they demonstrate
every year. Okay. We were demonstration. We were the demonstration we got pretty good at student teachers. And anyway.
So we can thank you guys for many of the teachers and their patience, maybe?
Probably their patience. We actually made sure that they knew what they were doing before they got there. They had to really be dedicated to get through our demonstration school.
I'm sure, though, you were the ideal student, right?
You said you weren't going to go there, right? I don't know. We all had fun. We weren't malicious, just active.
You were active. That's a really great way. You're like, we were just active. Okay, so you were an active young person. You went through Adventist education in those elementary years. Was there anything during that time that started helping you start creating that more personal connection with Christ?
Well, we had week of prayers every year. And I couldn't tell you what a lot of them were about, but I remember there were several students, theology students from the university that came down and presented 1 week of prayer. And that one probably, I don't remember all the things they talked about, but that one impressed me. One of those people has worked in this building. His name's Monty Saline.
Okay.
He's retired now, but he was one of those students that came in town and talked to the elementary school for the week of prayer.
I think those weeks that we have all these, more of a strong spiritual emphasis. I think they're very underrated in our schools for the impact that they can say. And you're right. There's a lot, though. I don't remember anything. But different people reach different people.
That's right.
And I remember when I was in academy, Ken Rogers, who was down in Southern Union, and then Jose Rojas. Those two. I remember those very distinctly. And Ken Rogers actually, it wasn't just the words he said, but he talked with me after, and there was some action. It was his love for me and my education. It transformed who I was and who I thought. And I love that you remember who one of those people is, because it's obviously made an impact on you at that age.
Yeah, pretty amazing that all these years later.
You still remember that
Right.
that was the person, because you're a kid.
Yeah,
I mean, who knows? Who cares?
I wasn't baptized yet, so I was under 12. So, somewhere between 7 and 10, maybe,
Wow.
this happened.
And that's actually even more impressive to me, because
Yeah.
I don't think I could have told you the name of who did our week of prayers at that young.
I don't know why it was Monty Salim that I remember. It must have been something he presented. I mean,
Yeah, it must
I
have been
could tell it
impactful.
was, when I remember it, it was something, he was very authentic, in what he was presenting. And, you could tell that he loved Jesus Christ. And that's probably why they were down there, is because they had had an experience of their own. And now they were coming and share that with us.
Authentic Christianity, nothing can beat that. When people have experienced Christ and it just radiates out of them. You don't even sometimes need to tell people you're a Christian, because it's just part of who you are, and I love that you still remember that moment so pivotally. You might not remember all the words, but you remember his authenticity and his love. All right. So you graduate from 8th grade and you're out of this demonstration school.
Yeah.
And now you get to be a high school student.
And this is where a big change comes in my life.
Okay.
La Sierra, California to Gentry, Arkansas.
Ooh, this is, I've been to both. That's a very big change.
Always having lived in La Sierra, all your friends are there. You're 13 years old.
Now, La Sierra is California.
So
Arkansas. This is like the beachy kind of, not beachy, but it's like that sunny, beautiful
grew
weather.
up at the beach. I grew up in the pool, water skiing, all those type of things that you do in California. And we moved to Arkansas.
Okay. So for people who are not...
Between
yeah.
the graduation and when high school starts.
All right. So for those of people who may be listening to this who are not from America, Arkansas is like the polar opposite. Well, maybe not polar, because polar would be pretty more like in Wisconsin.
At the time that I moved there, it was polar opposite.
Oh, so it's...
I mean, Arkansas is in the hills, and they call the people that live there hillbillies.
Oh, poor people. I mean...
That's, but that gives you the concept.
But it's
not that they're
big
stupid
trees
or anything. It's just...
It's a different kind of pace.
Yeah. I come from a desert environment to all of a sudden everything's green.
Forests.
Yes.
Lots of forests in Arkansas.
So there's big changes. And
it's also not quite as much of an Adventist bubble. Like La Sierra,
Right.
You have Loma Linda not too far away. You have like these Adventist, it's like this is Adventist entities. And Gentry, Arkansas has an academy.
And I got to say, this is Northwest Arkansas before Walmart. Okay.
Yeah, because this is where Walmart now is kind of in that.
Bentonville, Arkansas is 20 minutes away from Gentry, and that's where the headquarters now is for Walmart.
Yes, but these are before Walmart days.
This is before Walmart, and Walmart, of course, has brought in people from all over the world to Bentonville. And so this was way before that. Sam Walton was just starting his Ben Franklin store in Bentonville when I was first getting there. So.
Okay. So what on earth uproots your family?
That's what my question when I was 13 years old was exactly that. What in the world just happened to me and what's going on? And it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me because all friends that I had ever known, I'd never even been to Arkansas before. I did have an uncle who was a pastor at the Gentry Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I had 2 cousins there. That's all I knew about Arkansas.
But your whole family moves here,
Our
right?
whole family picks up and moves. And it wasn't until a little while later that I found out why. And it was even longer than that I started to appreciate why that they made the move. And I have a brother, and we haven't talked about that yet, but I have one brother who's about a year and a half younger than I am. So we have 2 boys growing up in Southern California, and my parents thought, there's probably a better place that we can raise our children than in Southern California. And so that's why they moved. They had a very successful insurance business there. They sold it. My dad had quite a bit of real estate that he sold, and we moved to Arkansas. My parents kind of retired for about 3 years. And I didn't appreciate any of that, of course, when I was 13. Mm-hmm. Looking back, I can see the wisdom in it, because out of my class of about a little over 70 students in 8th grade, 20 of those are dead.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's a pretty large group out of a class of 73 or 4 or something like that. And, failed abortions, drinking themselves to death, drug overdoses, and various other things, that these friends of mine that I went to school with are no longer here. And it was probably, a lot of that was the environment that was there. And my parents took me and my brother and I out of that environment. Not that Gentry, Arkansas is pristine and pure and everything else, but it was probably a little more supporting traditional beliefs and values than Southern California.
And that's what your parents
and
wanted to raise you in, that kind of environment.
If my father would have not worried about that and kept all of his real estate holdings, I mean, they had the very successful insurance business already. About 5 years after he sold everything, that's when the California land boom really took off, and houses that cost $20,000 now are costing $200,000. And, so I'm seeing that my father would have been a multimillionaire if he'd have stayed. I mean, he never was a millionaire, but he probably would have been if he would have stayed, but he could have lost his kids.
And that wasn't worth it.
I mean, this is looking back as an adult. Okay. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the way I was looking at it when I was 13.
No. For some of the listeners, they kind of know, because I interweave a little bit of my life while we're talking, but I also uprooted my children. We moved from Texas to here, and about the same ages, and kids they see these uproots very differently.
Definitely.
And it can be a little bit challenging. So did you go to Ozark? I
went to Ozark.
Okay.
Back then it was just Ozark Academy. Now it's Ozark Adventist Academy. And I just went back to my 50th year reunion. Alumni. It was my first one.
Oh.
First one to go.
My nieces and nephews were there because that's where they graduated.
Okay.
From.
Okay.
We can talk later.
Yes. But, I hadn't ever been back. I mean, I'd been to Gentry, but not to an alumni meeting.
Really? In 50
years. So it just happened here about 2 weeks ago. And 18 of our class from 1973 were able to get back for that reunion. So it was kind of neat to see, where everybody was and how God had led in their lives too. So,
Very
I mean,
cool.
because all of us were teenagers going to Ozark Academy. Academy. So we could tell stories about each other, but we didn't.
So what you're telling me is I should have invited them to come and join the podcast.
We believe in grace and leaving all that type of stuff at the bottom of the sea where God put it.
Okay, well let's talk a little bit about why we maybe needed grace. No, tell us about your high school. You don't have to get into all the reasons why you needed grace, but tell us a little bit just about what were the high school years like for you.
Well, they were pivotal. One is the first year that I was there, it was the worst year of my life. I mean, I'm a teenager. everything's the worst year of your life, right? When you're 13 or 14. But I mean, it was the worst year of my life. And it was really, for me, it wasn't a bad year otherwise, but for me, it was bad. Just the shock of going from the West Coast of the United States to the midsection of the United States in Northwest Arkansas. And, but I learned something from that has really been good as a worker for the church, working for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, because you'd end up moving quite often. And after that first year of moping around and, kind of mourning what just happened to me, and I finally came to the conclusion, there's nothing I can do about this. And actually that summer I went back out to California, and when you're not there, things change, people move on, you're not part of what's going on. And when I came back, then I thought, well, I just need to make it work here. Mm. And that attitude of making it work wherever you are, bloom where you're planted, like they say, is a good thing to have as a Seventh-day Adventist Church worker.
Accurate. So how is your spiritual journey at this point? Has it become a little more your own? No, not yet. Okay.
No. So I was baptized out in California when I was 12, like everybody else in my class. We took the Bible studies and we got baptized. Okay. The whole group does it together. And, I'm not saying that those aren't good decisions, because just to backtrack a little bit here, there was a group of us that probably in second grade, maybe even. Second grade. No, it was second grade. There were 4 of us that on the playground, when, I don't know what brought us to this, but we agreed to meet in heaven. And and this is skipping back and now going ahead, is when I worked back down there in Southeastern California Conference, I went to a funeral for one of those individuals' father. And 3 of us were there. There was 3 of the 4. And I'm sitting there as we're talking and saying, I wonder if they remember that commitment. And finally I asked, do you all remember, we were out on the playground and we committed to meeting in heaven? And they all, the 3 that were there, said, I was thinking the same thing and I was just afraid to ask. So these commitments as young children are good. They may not be permanent at that point. But nothing, I guess, is permanent in this world, but it may not be settled, but it's important at the level and age that the person is.
I think sometimes we have this impression that once you get baptized, you have to have a ride, but actually our entire spiritual journey is constantly recommitting to Christ.
Exactly.
And I think that those decisions that our young people made, I made a decision around that same age, those are really meaningful because they're still our decision. And we're saying that at this stage with what I know, this is what I am choosing. And then it's a constant journey and constant process now to continue to grow and to continue to recommit to those same things. And our knowledge will always increase. My knowledge has increased this year. It, increases daily. And
it's increased today. Yes.
When we get to heaven, we're going to be learning throughout all eternity. So that's going to be a lifelong learner. I've always considered myself one. Really going to be a lifelong learner. So that's really cool, though, that everyone felt that same thing. And all of my classmates have left the church. So hearing that story of 4 men who were second graders sitting on a playground, and all these years later, everyone wondering, do we all remember the commitment we made to each other? Yeah. It's actually a very special thing.
So, during the high school years, we had, weeks of prayer again. But I remember one of those, it was, this is 70s now, early 70s. So you're coming out of the 60s. So you have, kind of that movement of the 60s, Here in the United States, they call it hippies. Haven't gotten to yuppies yet, but hippies. And so towards the 70s, some of those hippies started becoming Christian. And some of those hippies that became Christian became Seventh-day Adventists. And I can remember two guys, I don't even remember their names. But I remember them coming probably in my junior year and having the week of prayer. And again, they were very authentic. They were dealing with real issues. They weren't just presenting the stuff that I'd heard all my life, but they were presenting it in a way that, it spoke to me. It didn't really convince me to do anything different than what I was doing, unfortunately, but it did some of my classmates. And they made commitments. And I saw one of those classmates here just 2 weeks ago, still committed. So, and actually actively presenting Christian concepts and everything and for retreats and so forth. So, and I remember that person specifically, kind of leading our group of kids, that you need to think about these things. Another thing in the junior year is I had a Bible teacher. I don't know whether I should mention names or not, but
I'm actually a big believer. If it's something positive, I think that we should always. I think building up our educators and our pastors and whatever, and letting them see how they make a difference, because people listening to this
at Ozark Adventist Academy on your junior year, every junior knew what they were going to have to do in Bible class, and that was to memorize 100 texts of Scripture. And these were not just little like Jesus wept.
John 11:35.
Yes. This was like, the three angels' messages, the 10 Commandments, and parts of the Sermon on the Mount. Not all of them were that way, but we had to do 50 the first semester and 50 the second semester. First semester, they only tested it on the first 50. The last semester, they tested it on all 100. And we had to have them all memorized so we could pass the test. I saw him here probably about 5 years ago at a camp meeting here in North America, and he's been retired for many years.
What's his name?
His name's Orland McLean.
Orland McLean.
And I saw him and I said, you remember us when we were juniors? You made us memorize 100 scripture texts, and he kind of was sheepish, and kind of was apologetic and saying, yeah, I remember that. But I said, don't feel bad. Those texts are still in my head. And, through all the issues of life, those texts have been there. And so I thanked him. Of course, this is an adult in the 50s, 60s, actually, thanking, but wasn't really thanking him back then.
No, I think we don't often know what we need. Sometimes we only know this in hindsight. But I love that he actually was instilling that in you, that even if it was something maybe you weren't thrilled about in the moment, that is something that you've been able to carry on with you throughout time. And once it's in there, the Holy Spirit can bring it back anytime he needs to. So at some point you become a senior.
Right.
And you graduate. And where does Dennis Carlson go to?
Well, we didn't do any big moves this time. It was just the Southwestern Southwestern Adventist University now.
Yes.
It was a different name. It's actually been several names since I went there, but now it's Southwestern Adventist University. It was Southwestern Union College.
Southwestern Union College. Okay.
So you don't want to put those on a T-shirt.
And this is in Keene, Texas.
You don't want to put those initials on a T-shirt. So that's why they changed the name.
Got it.
It was the day that I graduated, they changed it to Southwestern Adventist College.
Okay.
And now it's Southwestern Adventist University.
Yep. Okay. So you go there, and what do you decide to do your degree in?
It was never a question. I was doing business. Even when in my senior, we had to write about an occupation, I did mine on business. So, looking back, my parents never pushed my brother and I on what we should do. I mean, they didn't. I've known friends that their parents were always pushing them to be a doctor or a dentist or a preacher or something. And they usually didn't end up doing that, or if they did, they weren't happy. My parents never did that. But for whatever reason, I went after business, and in this case, accounting, business administration and accounting.
God bless people like you. I love people who go into accounting so that I don't have to. I spent a couple years trying to do that. It's not my thing. So you go into business administration, accounting, you graduate.
Well, just
we want to
before
know
we get there.
I was going to say, I feel like there's going to be some things here, though, that we need to explore.
My year between graduation from high school to college, I grew up in the swimming pool, in Southern California. So I took a life-saving class and then a WSI, water safety instructor class, which you have to have both of those to work as a lifeguard. So I wanted to work as a lifeguard when I was going down they had a pool at Southwestern Adventist University. So took that class, and the teacher of that class had just become a Christian, not a Seventh-day Adventist, but a Christian. And through the course of these things, asked me, what do you believe as a Seventh-day Adventist? And I went through the list of don'ts, which I don't know whether you've done that, but I got home that night, and that's probably where I could see a change, where I said, that's not what I believe. And I determined that I've got to figure this thing out for myself or chuck it. It's got to be either mine or, move on to something else. And so that was happening right toward the end of the summer. So I'm starting the university kind of on that quest. I tried to read Steps to Christ many times, as a Seventh-day Adventist growing up. And I'd gotten to really good on chapters 1 and maybe 2 and maybe possibly a little bit of 3, but I'd never made it through the whole book. It's only 113 pages. I decided I'm going to go through this book if it kills me. And it took me basically a whole year, because I didn't read any more than what I could understand. And so I was reading and rereading and rereading, and finally got through the book in about my first year of college. And that's probably where I can see the change happened, where at the end of that year, I made it my own. It wasn't my parents anymore. It was my belief. This is my church.
And that's such an important time when I think we're sometimes scared when young people start to question. Actually, they have to question.
It can go both ways.
But you have to question in order for it to become real to you.
That's right.
And one of the most important things we can do when we start to see kids question is to come alongside them, to support them, recognizing that this is an important process for them to internalize their faith. I'm so grateful you were on a campus where, you were having Adventist people around you that, you could, go to if you needed to, or just whatever. But it's like you had this safe place where you could be able to question and explore and get answers.
And we had another week of prayer the second year.
I feel like this is really just an advertisement for Week of Prayers. So all of you chaplains out there, keep going.
But it was Morris Venden.
Oh, okay.
And that probably, between reading through Steps to Christ, and then he actually focuses. I mean, most of his presentations were coming right out of Steps to Christ. And I had just read it the year before. Really helped me move away from maybe what some people look at as a legalistic way of growing up in the 50s, 60s. I mean, that's when I grew up, to having faith in Jesus Christ alone. And trusting in Jesus Christ in all areas of my life. And it doesn't come automatically. That's still a process going on today. But that's it. Probably those two things are what really got me heading towards Jesus on my own. He's coming towards me as well, but I'm the one initiating. I'm opening the door, to use that metaphor.
I love that. I love that book too. So I really love your week of prayers. Like you really remember them.
I had never really thought about that chain until just now.
I'm wondering if there's going to be any more week of prayers in our future here with your storyline. You need to start thinking about the upcoming week of prayers. So, is there anything else from these college years that is important?
Well,
do you meet anyone?
In my accounting class, there was a young lady.
I was wondering if
named Alma. And you know how you end up sitting kind of in the same places in classrooms? You don't have to. There's no assigned seats or anything. But it was kind of in a L shape, and she sat here, and I sat right here. And that's just where we sat.
Which is great because you can look at her.
Well, I wasn't that interested in looking to begin with, but became more interested as class went on. It actually was another year before we had our first date, but we started going to class together.
Okay, so what was her degree in?
Business and accounting.
Oh, that's handy. So you had a lot of classes together.
We both have the same degree.
Okay, so you meet Alma, who is one of the most kind and passionate people I've ever met. She's just so sweet. You actually make the perfect couple. You make the perfect couple, actually, when I think about it now.
Well, there's no perfect couple this side of heaven, but,
Well, I guess you're practicing for it.
We've stayed together for 45 years this year.
Wow.
So.
That's this is a little tangent here, but how do you make it 45 years? For real. Like, in a world right now where it's hard. And I don't even think it matters if it's a world now. Marriage is never easy. If you keep a couple reasons, what has made it so that you and Alma have been able to stick together?
That's a very good question. And I know that's a pat answer that everybody says, but probably what I would say is she grew up a Catholic, and she became a Seventh-day Adventist a few months before she came to Southwestern Adventist University. Wow. And so what I noticed observing around the corner of the table is that she was very committed to God. And at this point in time, I'm a junior now, so I've gone through freshman, searching, sophomore, finding my way towards Jesus, and junior now. I'm noticing that she is very committed, and that's what's very important to me in a life partner, is that their first commitment is to Jesus Christ. And I could say that's probably, because there's no perfect marriage this side of heaven, so we've certainly had our times, but there's, Jesus, when we're both heading towards Jesus, we tend to stay together, in that quest for Jesus.
So junior year, you meet her. When do you guys get married?
Actually, we graduated together. She was one of these very intelligent folks that went through school in 2.5 years in college. And so she started a year after I did, but we graduated the same year. And I worked for a year. And she went to graduate school. And so it was a year after we graduated that we were married.
Excellent. So, okay. So you graduated, you're about ready to get married, you're married at this point, but...
I was engaged, yeah.
What did you do when you came out?
Well, where I was in my spiritual walk, I thought, business, God needs his business people as well as pastors and everybody else, teachers. And so I thought, I'll try that first. And so I sent resumes to every conference, to the General Conference, North American Division, all the entities, made up a resume and sent it out. And one of those resumes got forwarded to Pacific Press.
Okay.
And they forwarded it to a manager of an Adventist Book Center who was looking for a business intern. It was a brand new program. Actually, I ended up being the first Seventh-day Adventist business intern for the Adventist Book Centers on this program. And so I was working on a team between graduation from college and, hopefully going to work. If I didn't go to work, I was going to go to graduate school. So Alma and I both worked on a team where we were given Bible studies all summer.
Okay.
And it was during that time, we were in a small town that had no phones, no cell phones for sure at this point in time. And so I got a letter from my parents saying, you need to call this number. So I had to go over to a payphone. And people don't probably even know what that is these days, but
This
a payphone.
is this phone where you put money in it to make calls.
And you make a call. And I made a call and talked to Bill Skidmore, who was the manager of the, at that time, Missouri Adventist Book Center, which is not Iowa, Missouri, just Missouri. And he said, we're looking for a business intern. And, he described what he was talking about, when it involved in the training of actually learning business from a ministry perspective. And I thought, wow, that would be great. And so I had to finish my commitment there, giving Bible studies. But when that was over, I went up and met with him, and we ended up going to work there in August of 1977. So August 1977, August of this year will be 46 years.
Wow. So you actually start your career though, actually working for the church.
Right.
And how long did you work in that area?
Well, I've worked for I don't know how much time we've got going here, but I worked for 25 years managing Adventist Book Centers.
I did not know that.
And
so which ones did you work at?
I worked, as an intern in the Missouri Adventist Book Center. Then about a year and a half later, went to the Illinois Adventist Book Center as an assistant manager. And then about a year and a half later, went to Arkansas, Louisiana Conference as the manager.
Going back to ARCLA.
Mm-hmm. So, you always want to go back and give back, right?
Right,
so
there you go.
That was my giving back. And then from there, went to Washington Conference as the manager, and we had 2 stores there. After that, went to Southeastern California, where I grew up, La Sierra, giving back again, kind of like, as the manager of Loma Linda and the Riverside Adventist Book Centers. And that's my 25 years for Adventist Book Centers.
That was the nutshell version of it. But so what was it like to work with, for people who aren't familiar with Adventist Book Centers, these are basically Christian
retail bookstores
kind of a thing. There's also health food and stuff that can often be found in these, but where a lot of our publications from at that time, Review and Herald and Pacific Press.
When I started, it was still Southern Publishing as well.
And Southern Publishing. So all of these different books written by Adventist authors. This is where Adventists would often come during camp meeting time.
Right.
We would have these big book sales, and you would wait all year. You would wait all year for the camp meeting book sale.
Yeah.
And then you would come and you would buy like stacks and stacks of books so that you could kind of go home and read them all year long. And that was kind of how Adventists got their reading material.
Right. And we did book displays as well, where we had a bookmobile, they called it. It was a truck that pulled a trailer, and we had all the books back there, and the food, vegetarian food, that we would go around throughout the conference and set up a little mini bookstore for a few hours and then go on to the next one. So that's did that for 25 years.
What were some of your favorite things that you learned about yourself and the church during this time?
That's an interesting question, because when you work for the church, there's a lot of great people, but you end up, when you're kind of out there, also meeting some of the other people.
Because we're all human. That's
right. We're all human. We're all in need of grace, and God gives us grace, and I'm glad for that. I remember and I probably dealt with this many times myself, but I remember my wife, she grew up Catholic. Well, sometimes when you have a mobile bookstore and you're set up at, in a fellowship hall of a church, people come and they figure they've got your ear, you can't go anywhere, and they start telling you all the bad things about the church. And my wife sat there and listened. She would go with me on these book displays, and she was checked out the people as I helped the people. And she was, getting about as much. And she finally looked at the guy right in the eyes and said, I grew up Catholic. Should I go back to that church? And this guy, all of a sudden, the color drained out of his face, and he quit telling all these things and left. And so,
did he buy some books?
He didn't buy any books, unfortunately. But those are kind of some of those things that they're kind of humorous now when you think about them. But it's sad. You find out about both sides of there's a lot of great people that we met during those years as well.
So, so you worked for 25 years in, I was going to call it publishing. I mean, it is an informed publishing.
It is.
It's the marketing part of the publishing.
Right.
So, you're in California, right at the end of this
25 years.
This 25 years, and you get a call or something to what?
Well, we had a child by then.
Okay.
that had come along. Her name's Chris, and I had remembered my experience as a teenager being uprooted from where I'd always lived to someplace else. And I thought, I'm not going to do that to my daughter. So when she was probably about 6 or 7, we started praying, Lord, we'd really, we didn't know we were going to have a child when we went to California. Okay. So we probably wouldn't have gone, but she was born in the same hospital, believe it or not, 40 years later. I was 40 when she was born. 40 years later, we're born in the same hospital.
Oh, wow.
In Riverside, California. So, we started praying, Lord, if there's a place we can, move, please work that out. And when she was about 8, we got a call to go into plan giving and trust services for the Washington Conference. So we'd already been there for 8 years, and now they were asking us to come back, but in another area, plan giving and trust services. So that's where that transition was made between Adventist Book Centers.
Now, plan giving trust services is very different than what you're currently doing. I mean, driving a bookmobile and setting it up and selling books. I mean, in a way, you're selling people on something, but it's a very, very different kind of a thing. What piqued your curiosity or your interest in the idea of planned giving and trust services? And actually, before you say that, explain a little bit, what is planned giving? I'll let you give a commercial. This is your commercial plug for planned giving trust services. What is it?
I'll give you the 2-sentence.
Excellent.
Here.
You have it down to 2 sentences.
Yes.
I'm impressed.
Plan giving it's 2 parts. I mean, there's plan giving and trust services.
That's 1 sentence.
That was an explanation of the sentence. Okay. Plan giving is where we're encouraging every member to be faithful to God and have a plan to provide for their families and God's work. Trust services is the receiving of gifts and working in that area and it could be from members, could be from people who are not yet members of the church, and doing that in a professional manner. Okay. So that's what we do in plan giving and trust services.
So besides the fact that we're thinking, God, help us to transition out of here, we want to raise our child in a slightly different environment. What about plan giving trust services interested you?
Well, even though my degree is in accounting, I was always praying to God, please don't make me be a treasurer. Sorry to all the treasurers out there. But, it just didn't fit my personality, I don't think. I'm more of a get it done type person, And
treasurers are important. They have a very important job.
Very important.
But it's just not the job you want.
That's right. It doesn't really fit for me. And in Adventist Book Centers, I was the manager. You make a plan, you work a plan. But when I looked around, what other things in the conference, if I was doing anything else, plan giving had always been that. If I wasn't doing Adventist Book Centers, I might be interested in that, and that's where God put me. And so, but it took a change in my thinking, and it took about 6 months after starting in plan giving and trust services, because you always work your plan when you're in retail, in a business. Well, in plan giving and trust services, one call could change your whole day, your whole plan. You just throw it out the window, and you've got it. You can't tell somebody, well, I have an opening 3 weeks from now when they're in the hospital and about ready to die. You've got to go right now. And so and this is where kind of another step in maybe spiritual growth came along, because I thought, I need to trust my calendar to God. And I wasn't, And so when I started doing that, it was amazing to see how God would manage my calendar in ways that I could never have done myself. I mean, you still plan, okay? If God's in charge of your calendar, you still plan, but you leave those plans in God's hands. And so I'd be going out, maybe had four stops, that I was going to go visit that day. And when I'm on my way to my first home, I get a call from maybe the second stop saying, I can't meet with you today. So I've got this block of time. Now, I always brought things along so I could work in my car, laptop, phone, that's all I needed. But as I'm continuing on towards my first stop, I get a call from somebody, I really need to meet with you today. And I say, well, I've got a spot open. And they said, and it was right in the right sequence, where I was going, and I can be there at this time. They said, fine, I'll see you then. I would have never been able to take that call and fulfill that visit if God hadn't been in charge of my calendar. So,
I love that, because I think we often can get called into meetings, or things can change and alter our days. And I'm sure you get this a lot. It's like we have this plan for our day. Right. I actually, last night it happened where I actually wrote somebody, I was like, I need you to hold me accountable. I need to write 10 emails in the next 20 minutes, because I'm like, I'm falling behind on keeping up with people. And at the exact same time, they wrote me and they're like, you need to spend time in prayer right now. And the thing is, we don't understand our calendar. And actually, 20 minutes later, something happened, and I needed to have spent that last 20 minutes in prayer, and I didn't know that. They didn't know that, but God knew that. And we need to be able to be in tune with the Spirit and not be so controlled by our schedule and our organization that we don't have the flexibility to allow the Holy Spirit. Honestly, out of everything you say today, that was probably one of the most important things that I know I needed to hear, because I struggle. There's easy things to give to God, but I'm someone who likes orderliness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
this is allowing somewhat of a Holy Spirit-led chaos.
Yes. But, that's very interesting, because going back to that week of prayer again, that Morris Venden, I remember him saying that if you ask God to wake you up to spend time with him, he will. And so I thought, I'll try it. I was kind of searching in that mode anyway. And so I started doing that, and he did. And I still used an alarm clock probably for another 5 years or so, but for the last probably 35 years, I have never used an alarm clock. And traveling all over the world like I do now with Plan Giving and Trust Services, I've never missed a plane. He always wakes, when I go to sleep at night, I say, wake me up so I can spend time with you tomorrow, and time so I can, get everything done that I need to get done tomorrow. And he has done it for 35 years. And
I think we should all take that challenge.
It's amazing, and, sometimes I'm flying at 2 a.m, or 3 a.m. And so I'm having to get up at midnight or 1 o'clock. And we haven't talked about a master's degree, but when I was working on a master's degree, I determined I'd rather flunk than not spend my time with God. And I didn't flunk, but I always put that first in my day. And was when I was working, I'd get up because I had a family at that point in time, and my daughter was young, and I'd get up at 2 a.m. and study till 6, and that was my time for school. And then when I got home at night, I could be there with the family until I went to bed early. I went to sleep early, but those putting God first in your life. And then asking God to help you keep him first in your life. Sometimes he wakes me up at 1 a.m. because I must have a lot to do that day. And I've gotten till I recognize that when I wake up and I'm just, wide open eyes, and I just get up and start working. and it's usually something that, maybe I've been thinking about, or he's, been impressing me that I need to be doing. And so, it's just been an interesting, Ellen White talks about the experience, the Christian experience. It is. And it's not something you just have when you're 12 years old and you're baptized. It's ongoing, moment by moment, every day, every moment of every day.
So you're in Washington, starting Plan Giving Trust Services. Where do you go from here?
We loved Washington State. We'd been there twice, and we ended up spending combined 20 years there in Washington.
Okay.
And I always liked to try to stay longer. Every time I'd move, I'd stay longer than I did before, so that's kind of where it's been. Don't think that's going to happen here at the General Conference, but because we were 12 years that second time in Washington State. Okay. We loved it there. We were looking forward to retirement, and we'd already bought our retirement home. We'd remodeled it. We were renting it out. And through circumstances in 2015, around March, we had a really bad renter, and they trashed the house. And I'd experienced this before, that when God wants you to make a change, he starts preparing you to make a change. So I told my wife, this is March of 2015, God's doing something here. He's making us uncomfortable with Washington State. And, but just this whole situation.
So does San Antonio play a part now?
I was in San Antonio, but that was not a part yet.
Really?
I was not elected in 2015 in San Antonio.
Okay.
It wasn't until annual council, October 11 of 2015, that I was elected to my current position. Now, it wasn't until in August that it started to be coming clear what God was trying to make us uncomfortable and willing to consider moving. Okay.
The idea of moving from Plan Giving Trust Services at a conference level, which people probably don't necessarily. So at the conference level, you're going and you're visiting all of these people.
That's
it's
right.
a very interactive. It's a with the people, as you said, in the hospitals or in their homes, dining rooms, in their living rooms.
Meeting their kids.
Yeah. But it's a pretty big jump to come to the General Conference, because it's a very different kind of like, I don't need to.
Boy, it was the first 2 years here in Silver Spring. You're kind of just trying to keep your nose above water.
But did you come as the director or as an associate?
As a director.
So you didn't even have
I've never even served on most of the committees that I'm now responsible for.
This is a really like you jumping in the deep end, and it's more like jumping in the ocean, and you're trying to figure out.
Fortunately, the previous director, Gary Dodge, was very gracious and gave me immense amount of help to get going.
Okay. Even
traveled with me to outside of the country. I had never used a passport before coming to this building. So you
never left the country?
I'd left the country to Canada, Mexico, and maybe the Caribbean, but you didn't need a passport before 2001, for those things. And so I had never used a passport until coming to this building. Now I've visited 43 countries in 7 years.
So you're a little busy. Just a little busy. Now I feel even more special you made the time to come and be with me. So how did this change? Obviously God was preparing you. How did this impact you? How did this change your view of the church? I know when I came here, I always understood we were a worldwide church. Like we kind of get that, you know. Mm-hmm. When you come and you start serving here, you actually see in a whole different sense. All our coworkers are from around the world, you know. Like right. You and I are very much like North American division people up until right. these moments, you know. And then it's like all of a sudden you're like, you know, you're someone from Brazil, someone from like, you know, Zambia or
Mauritius.
Like it's like they're it's like so. it's such a beautiful picture of the world when you come into this building.
Yeah, you know, you always know, I mean, growing up with mission stories and everything, you know it's a worldwide church, but you don't really understand the scope of that until you come to this building. And when you start seeing, you know, you grow up with, to a certain extent, you hear all these mission stories about people who are way back in the jungles, you know, and I'm sure there's plenty of those places still around, but really the mission today is urban.
Yep.
I mean, with, you know, going on towards 60% of the world population in urban areas, I mean, that's where the church is now and working, and that's really where, if you were telling mission stories today, you know, to our children today, it would be of these urban areas that have millions of people that need to know Christ. And this was not an easy move. I can tell you that. It's coming to this building is something that had never even entered my mind. I mean, this was, it took a while to just to get your mind around that concept. And we loved Washington State. If you've ever been to Western Washington around the Seattle area, it's beautiful. You know, we liked the outdoors, and this was just the East Coast. We never lived on the East Coast before, you know, in these dense urban areas. And it was not an easy move for Alma and I. I mean, we could have just as easily said no and to this call. And maybe, you know, I don't know what would have happened. You never know. Once you make a decision, you don't know what the option, what the alternative would have brought. But I can tell you this. I mean, it's been amazing, you know, the way God has worked in the area of Plan Giving and Trust Services in the last 7 years. I mean, he's always worked in that area, but, you know, just to see it up close, you know, and personal.
Well, I want to say thank you for coming and spending time with us. I think two big takeaways for me from your story is, one, week of prayers really matter. It sounds silly, but for those pastors and those chaplains who sometimes they don't know if what they're saying or doing is making an impact.
Yeah.
Today you
probably don't feel like it's done any good.
Feel like it's not doing any good.
Because we're all sitting there blank stares or blowing bubbles or you know.
Or acting indifferent.
Yes.
But it is going in. And today you talked about it in your elementary years and your high school years and your college years. And these each proved to be pivotal moments in your spiritual walk. And I think that's really important to our chaplains and our religion teachers and our school administrators, that these weeks where we have, I like the term week of spiritual emphasis,
right,
you know?
Right, that's like what they call them now.
Yes. But like when we have these weeks, they are of critical importance. And 40 years from now, a student who is sitting at their school maybe recounting on a or whatever's out at this point. I'm pretty sure podcasting will not be the thing at 40 years, but whatever is popular in 40 years, that they'll be telling the stories of the people that they brought in. And also for those of us who may get called to speak, and we're looking at those blank stares, is not to worry about them. is to pray deeply for them and deeply for what the Holy Spirit wants to say, not knowing the long-lasting impact that those words could have. And the second thing, and I love this.
And being authentic when you're doing it.
Being authentic. And that's the thing. We got to stop trying to put on this pretense, this show. Young people can see through it. What they want is to see authentic, humble Christianity. People who show Christ, that are in love with him. You're right, the authenticity really matters. But the second thing that I want to challenge anybody who is listening or watching this is to let God take control of areas that maybe you aren't. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is for every viewer or listener, but for me, I know that what you said was almost an indictment to me. I have been struggling greatly with my calendar, and what you said was incredibly convicting. I have never said, God, you take it. Because each day I feel like I didn't fulfill what I was supposed to fulfill, yet I was in exactly where God wanted me to be. And I need to change that and be like, God, you bring me where I need to be. You show me who I need to be with.
Since I made that commitment, I don't know of any time when I've not gotten something done that had to be done that day. And it's just incredible to me. I mean, sometimes I say, look at how's this? It gets done. God makes it happen.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dennis. I really, really I've loved our talk. And next time you walk by my office, make sure you stop and say hi.
I'll try to remember to smile.
You always smile. You're always smiling. You always come with your cute little lunchbox and stuff by my office. I love it. Anyways, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Glad to be here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A&N Profiles with our guest, Dennis Carlson. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel or wherever it is that you're tuning in from today. We don't want you to miss any future episodes. Thank you for spending this time with us, and join us next week as I continue to get to know the life stories of other more inspiring people.